My name is Isabel Grant. I'm 38 years old, and I own a small vintage design studio in the Fremont district of Seattle, Washington. From the outside, my life looks quaint. I wear secondhand denim jackets, bike to work rain or shine, and spend my days restoring forgotten furniture most people would throw to the curb. To my family, though, I'm the letdown in a long line of overachievers. A childless, unmarried woman with quirky hobbies instead of a real job. My father, Douglas Grant, a retired Navy officer turned financial advisor, believed every adult needed a 5-year plan and an IRA by 30. My mother, Helen, a former school board president, swore by early admissions and Ivy League ambition. Then there's my brother Derek, the pride of the family. He graduated summa cum laude from Columbia, landed a senior role at a biotech firm in San Francisco, married his college sweetheart, and bought a Tesla before he turned 35. Their holiday newsletters read like PR campaigns. This year, Derek's oldest built a solar-powered robot. And me, I majored in industrial design at the University of Washington. While Derek climbed the corporate ladder, I spent weekends digging through estate sales, teaching myself the craft of mid-century restoration. Once, I called home, thrilled that I'd salvaged a 1,950s Eames chair for a fraction of its worth. My mom sighed, "Maybe it's time you thought about a teaching credential." After college, I worked as a design assistant for a reclaimed furniture co-op in Ballard. For 4 years, I kept quiet, observed everything: how to identify teak grain, how to repair Danish dovetail joints, how to spot a knockoff from across the room. At 30, I took a leap. I drained my savings, rented a small studio loft with peeling walls and great natural light, and opened Grain and Form. On opening day, my mother brought a single orchid in a grocery store pot. She leaned toward my aunt and murmured, "Hopefully this phase passes before she's 40. From then on, I became background noise during family dinners. Each gathering was a stage set for Derek. I'd hear things like, "Still fixing old chairs," or, "Amazon's hiring." What they didn't know? Every piece I sold carried a story, and slowly, those stories were building a quiet fortune. A 19th century Japanese cloisonné vase once kept me up all night, panicking that I'd mistaken enamel for paint. A Victorian phonograph I sold to an older gentleman made him tear up when it played the song from his parents' wedding. They only saw clutter. They never saw the craftsmanship, the meaning, the story. But what hurt more than their indifference was the quiet certainty that, in their eyes, I was never quite enough. No matter how carefully I restored a sideboard or how many clients praised my work, I was still Isabel, the eccentric one. The one who never married, never earned a title worth mentioning at my mother's alumni luncheons. Eventually, I accepted that role. The family's quiet oddity. At least that role gave me space. No one knew, not even my best friend Lena, that one of my first major sales at Grain and Form changed everything. It was a mid-century modern floor lamp buried in a barn north of Spokane. The seller was downsizing. I bought it for $40.00. After cleaning decades of grime and replacing its cracked shade, I noticed the signature, Greta Magnuson Grossman, a rare original. After authentication, it sold through a Danish auction house for $37,000, 0 cents. I didn't touch a dollar of it. Instead, I opened a quiet investment account, kept my assets under my business name, and began studying not just furniture, but value, real value. I didn't need validation. I needed time, instincts, and the ability to see what others missed. Weekends became my treasure hunts. I traveled to estate sales in Olympia, Bellingham, even parts of Eastern Oregon, quietly picking through what others discarded. One of my most rewarding finds came from a university estate sale in Tacoma. A retired literature professor had passed, leaving behind thousands of old texts. Inside a dusty box labeled Miscellaneous, I found a 1776 first edition essay by Edmund Burke, complete with the author's marginalia. I paid $200.00 for the box. 6 months later, that one essay sold to a private collector in Boston for $195,000 0 cents. These wins didn't happen every weekend, but I didn't need them to. A few key sales a year, paired with smaller, steady ones, allowed me to quietly build wealth. I created Grain and Form Holdings LLC, hired a discreet advisor in Bellevue, and before long, I'd purchased the entire building my studio was in. Not just the studio, but all 3 loft apartments above it, the neighboring storefront I converted into an appraisal office, and even the gated parking lot in back. I owned it all. Quietly. Through Grain and Form Holdings LLC, a name my family had never even heard. They still thought I was squeaking by hanging on to my little hobby shop, and I let them think that. I lived simply, not out of necessity but by design. Most of my wardrobe was curated vintage, $25 0 cents, silk from estate sales, 1,940-esque wool coats with hand-stitched linings, one of a kill. My car was a 2009 Subaru Outback, well-kept and road-tested, with maps tucked into the glove compartment from buying trips across Oregon and Idaho. I didn't sip $300 0 cents Pinot Noir, but I did own a rare decanter set from 1920s Austria I found in a pawn shop in Tacoma, worth 10 times what I paid. Each fall I traveled for sourcing, but really, it was for myself. A week wandering the Brera galleries in Milan, afternoons in Lisbon's Tile Museum, sketching lamp silhouettes under overcast London skies. No one knew, and I liked it that way. That Thanksgiving, I arrived at my mother's house in Kirkland with a homemade pear tart and a box of antique silverware from Copenhagen. I brought my brother Derek's kids something small, hand-carved wooden toys from a local artisan. Every year I gave thoughtfully, and every year Derek's family barely unwrapped the tissue paper before pivoting to ski trip plans or remodeling updates. The house was picture-perfect. Manicured lawn, glass ornaments in every window. Derek's Tesla already gleamed in the driveway. I parked 3 doors down where the leaves were ankle-deep. "Well, look who finally made it," Derek smirked as I walked in. "Surprised, you're not running that little vintage shop today." I smiled and shrugged. My new assistant, Alina, had everything under control. But Derek wouldn't understand the concept of systems. To him, work meant long hours, big titles, and power suits. In the kitchen, Mom handed me a bag of sweet potatoes. "Can you mash these, Izzy?" Derek's plating the roast. Dad came in, bourbon swirling, gave me a brief nod. "How's your store doing?" he asked, not waiting for the answer. Then, just as we sat down to eat, Derek looked up and said, "Wait, where's my phone?" I looked up. My phone was still on the kitchen counter, right where I'd left it while rinsing pears. Before I could say a word, Derek walked over, picked it up, and tapped the screen. A second later, his expression shifted. The room's hum fell silent. His voice, usually smooth and smug, turned sharp. "What is this, Isabel?" Everyone paused. He held my phone up over the table like it was a piece of evidence. On the screen, a notification glowed. It was from Martin, my financial advisor. "Congrats. Your net worth just crossed $15,200,000 0 cents. Let's discuss the Copenhagen building next week." Dad put his bourbon down so hard the ice rattled across the glass. Mom's lips parted, stunned. Derek looked at me like I'd committed some corporate betrayal. 15 million? You? He snapped. From that little vintage furniture store? Are you serious right now? I stood calmly, hand outstretched. "Give me my phone." Derek pulled it back, eyes narrowed. "No. What is this? Are you doing something shady? Fraud? Crypto? Tax evasion? Because this doesn't make sense, Izzy. Are you even declaring all your income?" "Nothing illegal," I said evenly. Every cent came from Grain and Form. From antique furniture, rare finds, historical restorations. You know, the junk you always rolled your eyes at. Dad finally looked me in the eye. "Is this real?" he asked, voice quieter. "You have that kind of money?" I nodded once. The dining room, filled just minutes ago with the scent of roast turkey and cranberry sauce, now felt like a courtroom. Derek threw up his hands. So you just let us all believe you were broke? You had mom worried you couldn't afford health insurance. Dad kept offering to ask around for teaching jobs, and all this time, you've been sitting on a fortune like some antique hoarding heiress? Mom mumbled, still processing. She shops at consignment stores, wears patched jeans, and she's a millionaire. I took my phone gently and slipped it into my pocket. No one ever asked, I said softly. No one ever listened when I tried to explain what I do. I wasn't hiding anything. You just never cared, unless it was about Derek. He let out a bitter laugh. Well, now we know. We're gonna have a lot to talk about after this meal, Derek muttered, pushing his fork across his plate. As I glanced around the table, from Dad's narrowed gaze to the twitch in Mom's brow, I realized dinner had only just begun. But the warmth was gone. The turkey sat untouched, the cranberry sauce congealing. Even Mom's famous roasted sweet potatoes, the ones she made from Grandma's handwritten recipe, went cold. That number, 15.2 million, had pulled a silent grenade pin at our Thanksgiving table. No one said congratulations. No one asked how I did it. Just silence and calculation. Of course, Derek's wife, Marissa, was the first to speak. You know, she began, voice delicate and practiced. Avery's been accepted to the Royal Music Conservatory in London. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Isabel. But it's costly. Tuition, living expenses, flights. She trailed off, then looked up. If you helped, she could go. Are you asking me for money? I said evenly. It's not asking, Marissa replied, unfazed. We're family. You have it. We don't. Call it responsible sharing, Derek chimed in, as if that was a legal principle. Mom finally looked up from her water glass. You live alone, sweetheart. No kids, no school fees, no braces or college funds. Helping out isn't a burden, right? Before I could speak, Dad added, You've always been generous. Now's your chance to show it matters. Then, to my surprise, Derek leaned forward. You drive a 2009 Subaru. You wear thrifted jackets. You live in a studio apartment above your shop. Isabel, if you're not going to use the money, why hold on to it? I set my fork down gently. So because I don't flaunt it, I don't deserve it? He shrugged. You said it, not me. What about the years I spent researching, restoring, bidding at 6 a.m. estate auctions? The cross-country drives, the freight costs, the risk. They stared at me. I went on. You all called it junk, a hobby. Told me to get a real job. Now suddenly it's wealth, and you feel entitled to it? Marissa tried to pivot. We were worried. You owe the family some transparency. I let out a short laugh. That's rich. All these years, none of you ever asked. You never cared about my work, not unless it involved you. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, or quietly built something they never saw coming, subscribe to the channel. The next part of Isabel's story is where the tables finally turn. And now suddenly, I owe you something? I asked quietly, looking between them. Mom spoke up, her voice firmer now. No one's pressuring you, sweetheart. We're just suggesting that you use your good fortune to help the people closest to you. I looked around the table. Their eyes weren't warm or proud. They were calculating. Like I'd become a living trust fund, with a heartbeat. A minute passed. Then 2. Marissa cleared her throat. I'm only asking for Avery. Maybe just a small scholarship, Isabel. You could even put your name on it, the Isabel Grant Fellowship. One small act could change her life. And then what? I asked. Next, it'll be Derek's new home office, then Mom and Dad's roof, then a startup investment. What do I become, a bank account with shared DNA? Derek let out a sharp breath, finally showing frustration. Don't be dramatic. No one's asking for everything. Maybe just 3 million. That still leaves you 12 to enjoy. I turned to Dad, who had been silent the whole time. What about you? What do you think? He didn't meet my eyes. Your mother's right. We're not forcing you. But don't forget, we all thought about helping you back when you were barely keeping the lights on. Now, it's your turn. I nodded slowly. My chest felt hollow, the kind of ache that doesn't come from disappointment, but from confirmation. They weren't surprised, they weren't proud, they were entitled. No one asked how I learned to read auction catalogs in 4 languages. No one asked about my long nights researching provenance, or the risk of going broke if I misjudged a single item. They just saw dollar signs and called it love. The clock ticked toward 4 p.m. I need some air, I said, pushing back from the table. Don't leave in the middle of dinner, Mom called. I turned at the doorway, voice calm and sharp. I'm not leaving. I'm reclaiming the boundaries this family just bulldozed. And I stepped outside, no coat, letting the cold air sting my neck. For the first time, I felt completely awake. The wind chilled my skin, but inside I was burning clear. Behind me, their voices rose like shareholders mid-crisis. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the cold. 10 minutes later, I stepped back into the dining room. Before anyone continues dividing up my bank account, I said calmly, I need to make one thing clear. All 3 of them, Derek, Marissa, and Dad, turned to me like I was a disobedient student daring to speak out in the middle of a lecture. My money didn't come from luck, I continued. No one at this table helped me when I was building my business. No one checked in when I was hauling furniture at 6 a.m., scraping mold off a 19th century dresser, or coming home 12 hours later covered in dust and splinters. So why do any of you think you get a say in how I spend it? Marissa leaned back in her chair, arms folded. I'm not saying you didn't work hard, Isabel, but if you love your family, really love us, then sharing shouldn't feel like a burden. I gave a tight smile. I don't lack love. I lack respect. And it's never been mutual. Dad put down his glass again. Your mother worried about you for years. You never asked, I said. You never wanted to know what I did. Every time I brought up an auction, a find, a restoration. You changed the subject. You dismissed it as a quirky phase. Derek, now scrolling on his phone like he was calculating something, looked up. The issue isn't that you have money, Isabel. It's that you hid it. That feels like betrayal. I nodded slowly. If anyone in this house understands betrayal, it's me. Marissa's voice sharpened. Enough. You can't stand there on your moral pedestal while refusing to help your niece. I'm not refusing to help, I said, eyes steady. I'm refusing to be bullied. There's a difference. Mom's voice cracked. You're tearing this family apart over money. No, I said gently. You're just not used to me having power. She whispered. You live alone. No husband, no kids. What are you going to do with that much money? The words chilled me. I'm going to live how I want, and if that bothers you, I'll carry that too. Derek stood, chair scraping. If you walk out without agreeing to help, don't expect birthday invites. Don't expect to be at Avery's graduation. I stared back. You're using your daughter to threaten me? This isn't a threat, he said. It's consequences. I walked toward the door and grabbed my coat off the hook. My hands trembled, part cold, part rage. But my voice was steady. I'm not saying no because I'm selfish, I said. I'm saying no because I've learned the most expensive lesson of my life. Never give your worth to people who only recognize it when it turns into money. Dad's voice followed me. You'll regret this. Sooner or later, being alone will catch up to you. I paused at the threshold, turned slightly. I still have family, just not here. And I shut the door. I left my mother's house as dusk folded over Kirkland, the air biting through my thin wool coat. My hands were frozen, but for the first time in years my mind felt sharp. No more passive digs, no more concerned stares when I didn't perform their version of success. Just the sound of my boots tapping against the sidewalk, each step a quiet release. Back in Seattle, I didn't turn on the lights when I entered Grain and Form. I went straight upstairs to the small apartment above the shop and sat by the window. From there, I could see 14th Avenue light up. Soft jazz from the cafe across the street drifted into the quiet. Everything outside looked the same, but inside, I'd changed. Glanced at my phone. A single message from Mom. You hurt us, but I still love you. Nothing from Derek. Not that I was waiting. I silenced my phone, not to avoid confrontation, but to remind myself the voices that matter don't speak in guilt or passive judgment. The next morning, I opened the shop early, not to sell, but to clean, to restore order inside and out. Somehow, refusing to be treated like an emotional investment statement made me want to wipe the counters, organize the bookshelves, and breathe. Jasmine arrived at 8:00 a.m. with her usual cappuccino, worry in her eyes. Are you okay? She asked. I texted yesterday. I smiled and took the coffee. Better than you'd think. And thank you for your patience. Hiring Jasmine was one of my best decisions. 23, bright, deeply in love with antique textiles and embroidery, but more than that, she reminded me who I used to be. And now, I'm who I needed back then. In the weeks that followed, I poured my focus into grain and form. I started a blog series on American woodwork history. Traffic doubled. Letters from collectors started arriving. One of the students even asked if they could apprentice with me. I began hosting talk and tea sessions on the first Saturday of each month. I invited longtime customers, older neighbors from around the block, and a few curious university students. We'd gather beneath the soft glow of pendant lights, surrounded by patinated mirrors and velvet footstools, sipping peppermint tea, while I told stories. Like the beveled oak mirror once owned by an anonymous Civil War-era painter, or the cut glass goblets salvaged from a sunken shipment bound for Charleston. No one asked about my bank account, no one cared about my net worth. They asked, do you think this chest belonged to someone who traveled by sea? Or, how can you tell if this lace was hand-tatted or machine-made? They saw the past, not just the price tag. One afternoon, while wrapping a delicate ceramic vase headed to California, an email pinged into my inbox. It was from a museum in Nashville. They wanted to co-host a short course on colonial furniture joinery, based on a recommendation from a university professor I'd once helped authenticate a 19th century dining set for, and in that moment I realized I wasn't a shadow in Derek's world anymore. I was a name, a voice, a contributor. That December evening, I locked up grain and form and crossed the street to the corner bakery. Mrs. Marie, the 68-year-old owner with flowers still on her apron, had saved me a slice of warm apple pie and a mug of cinnamon tea. She'd been the first to hire me for a public appraisal event, and the first to say, "You've got eyes that see what others miss. Don't let them talk you into closing them." I told her, briefly, what happened at Thanksgiving. She didn't ask for the messy details. Just said, "Blood isn't always family. Family is who shows up and sees you." Later that night, I sat by the window of my apartment. The wind howled past the old brick building, but I wasn't cold. In my journal, I wrote one line. No one can take what I built with my own hands. I choose me, and those who choose me back. January came quietly. I hung the flyer in the window. Intro to Antique Appraisal and Preservation starts Jan 14. Max 8 students. Within 3 days, the class was full. As I watched the students lean in, eyes bright, notebooks full, I realized I wasn't just teaching. I was passing something forward. Jasmine, my assistant, now managed the entire storefront while I taught. She handled everything: inventory, bookkeeping, curation, and had even started dating antique fabrics without needing my second opinion. One Friday afternoon, after I wrapped a session on Brazilian mahogany's migration through the 1800s, Jasmine handed me a green envelope, tied delicately with gold ribbon. "Open it," she said, practically vibrating with excitement. Inside was a hand-drawn proposal, sketches, notes, and floor plans for transforming the back of Grain and Form into a preservation lab and hands-on learning space. "We could do real restoration demos," she said. "And I'd love to turn this into a place where students who care about old things feel like they belong." I stared at the sketches, at her handwriting looping around antique diagrams, and then looked up. "Jasmine, you're dreaming big." She smiled, "because I work for someone who dreams out loud." That night, I called Martin, my financial advisor. After an hour-long call and some number crunching, We set aside $250,000, 0 cents from my investment portfolio to launch the Camellia Fund, an annual scholarship for students and self-taught artisans in heritage restoration, antique interiors, or applied historical design. The only requirement? A portfolio tied to a real-world project. By March, we had 43 applications from 11 states. The first award went to Lina Martinez, a 27-year-old who had dropped out of school to work full-time. She submitted photos of hand-carved drawer pulls, French joinery samples, and a note that read, "I don't want to profit off the new, I want to preserve the old, so the future remembers." When I called her with the news, she cried. "You don't understand. You just saved me from going back to a night shift at the gas station." I hadn't saved her. I simply did what I'd once wished someone had done for me. Believed. By April, the back of the shop was reborn as the archive room, a space for workshops, guest speakers, and rotating student exhibits. One evening, while stacking catalogs, I heard the door open. Amanda, my cousin, someone who'd skipped every family holiday for years, stepped inside. "I heard about your course on a preservation forum," she said. "Didn't realize it was you. I just wanted to say, you're building something remarkable." I poured us mint tea. And by night's end, we were mapping out a class combining Appalachian ecology and material heritage together. I used to believe my world began and ended within four walls, wood-paneled, filled with relics and oil lamps, steeped in silence. But the moment I stopped waiting for approval from people who never asked about my passions, the world opened wide. It wasn't dinner parties or Ivy League cliques that welcomed me in. It was retired teachers, textile enthusiasts, and students who scribbled notes while I spoke about 18th century dovetails. No titles, no wine-stained conversations. Just shared reverence for craftsmanship and for the stories buried in hand-stitched seams and carved walnut. I finally had the life I'd built, not to prove anything, but to belong to it. Thanksgiving arrived late this year, not by the calendar. Seattle's maples had already turned amber and brittle, but in my heart there was no countdown, no dread circling the date, no need to rehearse smiles beneath a chandelier I never belonged under. This time, I was the one inviting. A week before, I called Olympia. My father answered. "I was thinking," I said carefully, "if you two wanted, you could come here this year. Just us. I'll cook." There was a pause. Then, "Your mother would like that." No apology, no nostalgia, but no resentment either. And somehow, that was enough. On Thanksgiving Day, they arrived just before noon. My mother stepped out of their car in a moss-colored coat, her silver hair swept back, lipstick soft rose. My father wore a mariner's cap and sunglasses. For a second, they looked like figures from an old photo I couldn't quite place. "Your shop," my mother said as I opened the door, "looks different. It's prettier than I imagine," she added as sunlight filtered through the wide front windows. "You've never seen it in the afternoon," I said. "The west light catches the wood just right." My father wandered to a carved table by the window, running his fingers along its edge. "How old's this one?" 1815. Cuban mahogany. Savannah shipping family. He nodded. No comment. But his shoulders eased. Upstairs the kitchen was warm with rosemary and butter. I'd made roast chicken, garlic mash, cranberry orange sauce, and pecan pie. Nothing extravagant, just real. Not to impress, just because I wanted to. And we ate, not awkwardly, just quietly. My father asked about the classes. My mother shared updates about the neighbors' grandkids and the town's new library hours. No one mentioned Lauren. No one brought up the $15.2 million, or family obligations, or what I should be doing, and that silence for once felt like respect, not avoidance. When dinner was cleared, I poured mint tea into glass cups and handed my mother a small, white-wrapped box. "For you," I said quietly, sliding it across the table. Inside was a silver camellia brooch from the late 1800s, delicate, understated, engraved on the back. I'd found it at a coastal auction near Bainbridge Island. I bought it not just for its beauty, but because the camellia was the emblem I'd chosen for the scholarship fund I'd started. It's beautiful, she whispered, her fingers brushing the petals, eyes wet with memory. You know, I always loved camellias. You used to pin one on your blouse every parent-teacher night, I said. I remember waiting on the porch, watching you come home from school, smelling chalk dust and gardenia. You still remember that? I remember everything. The room softened. My father set his teacup down and straightened his back. We were wrong, he said finally. To think you had to follow Lauren's path to be successful. I thought it would protect you. I know, I said gently. But I need you to understand this too. I'm not asking for praise. I just want to be seen. For who I am, as enough. My mother didn't say anything. She just gave a single quiet nod. Later, I walked them to their car. It was just past 7 p.m. The sky had turned navy blue, stars barely visible between the city lights. No ache, no regrets, just stillness, just closure. Back upstairs, I sat among the softened hush of aged oak, velvet, and time-worn stories, and I wrote in my journal. For the first time, Thanksgiving wasn't a performance. It was simply a meal shared in truth. They may never fully understand me, but they no longer get to define me. If you've ever been told you weren't enough because you chose a different path, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you've built in silence. And if my story reminded you of your own worth, subscribe. Let's keep creating spaces where quiet strength is honored.